2020, that was quite a year, wasn't it? I mean, COVID, lockdowns, Brexit, it was the epitome of the curse of living in interesting times. For the future sound of London, it was also a year of change, and we'll be looking at some of the music from 2020 in this week's episode of Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London. I've had this video series mapped out for a long time. There have been a few changes, things have shuffled up and moved around and expanded out, so I've worked out how things work best, changed video lengths and so on. But on the whole, I've stuck to videos between 25 and 40 minutes, covering a roughly chronological selection of releases and transmissions. And between 1987 and 2006, that chronology was essential to tell the story. But while it was the case at the start of the FSOLDigital era, and I say era as if it's not the vast majority of their catalogue by now, it gradually became less relevant. Still, patterns are a good way of arranging a story, and the previous few years have been nicely arranged naturally, starting with a calendar album, a Ramblings EP and a record store day release, with a full-length album of some kind following later in the year and a few other bits and bobs here and there. In 2020, all that went out the window. While the calendar albums remain a yearly fixture, the year's remaining releases became less predictable. What was once an overwhelming but still largely straightforward run of releases turned into a never-ending conveyor belt of music, both new and old, with albums, mixes, EPs, expanded reissues, new series of records, and various unclassifiable releases coming out as and when they were ready on a broader range of labels than ever before. The truth is, at this point, chronology isn't especially useful for telling the story of the future sound of London. What difference does it make to the comprehension of the FSOL story if Orphan Atmosphere EP came before or after We Have Explosive 2021, for example? The answer is none. So I've been rearranging the proposed contents of these videos for a while now, and frankly, very few of them have sat together in any comfortable way. So from now on, I'll be doing each year slightly differently, bunching the releases together into thematically linked groups. For example, Humanoid had 3 releases and 1 radio mix in 2021, spread out throughout the year. Now I'm going to be covering them together in a single video, rather than one per 2021 video. So that's how things will be going from now on. It won't be quite as chronological before, but hopefully it will be a slightly more concise and consistent story. Anyway, on with music. The Future Sound of London 2020 calendar album. Release date 22nd of October 2019, calendar. 25th of January to 31st December 2020, music. As a pleasant surprise in late 2019, 2020's calendar album was announced to be released alongside a physical calendar once more. Clearly a new printer had been found. My finances were very low at the time, and with only a couple of new images in the actual calendar, I opted for the music-only version. I'm not sure if this is a sign of getting FSOL fatigue from the staggering amount of releases over the previous 5 years, or what, but even now I consider it a surprising decision to make. Certainly at most points in the past, the idea of owning a piece of FSOL merchandise would have been no question at all. So no month-by-month description of the images this time, although thumbnails can be seen on FSOLDigital. Musically, the album has received a slightly more mixed response than normal. In a 2021 FSOL board thread, it was highlighted by some as an example of an underwhelming recent release. At least a couple of tracks came under fire for being disappointing on Facebook. In some ways it's easy to see why. From 2016 onwards, the FSOL palette has begun to head in a slightly more minimal direction. I've certainly used that word a lot in this series in recent videos, with less in the way of the dense, lush sound of the band's 90s work and more of a stark, cold, IDM-leaning sound. The 2020 calendar album is pretty much the extreme in this direction, with a very rhythm-forward sound, surprisingly little in the way of the usual melodic, euphoric sadness that one would expect from FSOL. It's quite easily the coldest sounding record in the band's history, with little in the way of welcoming melodies or thick textural ambience. Interestingly, despite its unconventional approach, it consists almost entirely of FSOL tracks, with only one piece from Black Hill Transmitter and one from Humanoid representing the wider FSOLDigital family. Myself, I find the album quite a difficult listen, but it's not bad when I'm in the mood. Whether intentional or not, its cool, somewhat distant mood feels incredibly apt for 2020, a year in which COVID-19 made the world a very, very different place. Certainly a couple of the track titles, Reassurance and The New Normal, represent the pandemic. A dark album for dark times. Nevertheless, if I did have to pick out an all-time least favourite FSOL album, and I'm not including Amorphous in this, just the electronic stuff, I would say it's probably the 2020 calendar album. That said, I've seen at least one person pick it out as a highlight of the calendar series, so your mileage may vary. The Future Sound of London Mind Function Wave. Welcome to a new decade. The first track of 2020 is from the Future Sound of London and is called Mind Function Wave. Written this month, fresh out of the studio oven and onto your plate. Great description there. Mind Function Wave opens 2020's part work release with a strange opening environment, some quiet rumbles and odd sounding animal noises. It gradually develops into a mellow down tempo piece with some soft major key synth droplets and quiet clicking drums. A louder synth line joins in the middle, adding some unexpected dynamics, and is reprised at the end after another quieter section. The animal sound returns as a closing environment. Future Sound of London, Oceans of Plastic. Hello FSOL calendar subscribers, welcome to February. This month it's FSOL from several years back. Recorded at 9LW Studios, produced by FSOL, engineered by Yage. Several years back is a pretty vague description. The drums certainly sound like the later FSOLDigital era, but the rest is quite different, a blend of noisy textures, distant pads, unusual samples, running water, synth sweeps, and near the end a soft, haunting synth arpeggio. It's a fittingly foreboding and bleak sounding track for the all too real concern of the title. Future Sound of London, Enforced. Hello FSOL calendar subscribers. Strange times. Here's an oddball from the vaults this month. Enforced. Stay safe people. A slightly more intimate email than usual announced this track, with the Strange Times and Stay Safe signs that this was the first piece to be released after the UK had gone into its first COVID-related lockdown. The first half of the track continues the percussion-heavy tone of the album, but the final 90 seconds or so introduces some synth pads, piano melodies, and other harmonic touches that brighten up the piece despite their largely melancholic tone. Despite being listed as from the vaults, it's difficult to pin any particular era on this strange chugging piece. Future Sound of London, Reassurance. This was recorded at some point during 2019. Suitable track for this moment, we all need some reassurance. Stay safe people. Another reference to the ongoing pandemic in the email there, although if I'm being honest, I'm not convinced the pitch black bleakness of Reassurance sounds particularly reassuring. It's a heavy going dark ambient piece with drones, odd clanging noises, synth notes and other heavy sounds in the mix. A strange, murky track. future sound of London, the new normal. Howdy FSOL calendar subscribers, hope everyone's doing okay. Here's the calendar track for May. This was created last summer, recorded at 9LW, engineered by Yage. Stay alert. There's something nice about the calendar tracks coming with little notes hoping everyone's okay. It's a lovely personal touch and very much welcome in the difficult times of 2020. The New Normal, although another title referencing the pandemic and social changes around it, is one of those magic little pieces that, despite being rooted in a minor key, manages to sound sprightly and even kind of uplifting at the same time. A continually changing synth sequence, some dark bass notes, punchy kicks and percussive synth sounds combine to create this very pretty little track. Probably my favourite track from the 2020 album, it was one of my suggestions for inclusion on Music for Calendars. Future Sound of London, Dusty DX. Hope everyone's doing good. June's calendar track is taken from a session using just a Yamaha DX7. Found at the back of an old cupboard, it was extracted and experimented on. This track, recorded late 2018, is titled Dusty DX Sessions. A very literal title and cover image for this month. Despite the DX7's association with clangy sounding late 80s FM synth presets, nothing of the sort is present here, with the now very familiar array of synth pads, skittering IDM beats, and similar sounds from this particular era of FSOL present throughout. A remarkable feat of programming in itself, the track is also an enjoyable example of this sound. Future Sound of London, Utterance. Hope everyone's okay. Here's the track for July. This one is another track from FSOL entitled Utterance, recorded at 9LW in February 2019 and engineered by Yage. Despite the disorienting lo-fi opening sounds, Utterance quickly moves into familiar territory, sounding very much like an Environment 6 era piece, with the same type of drum machine rhythms and synth arpeggios. Recorded at least 3 years after the Environment 6 sessions, it's remarkable to hear how stylistically similar it is. Future Sound of London, Alertions. Hi peeps, here's a track for August. FSOL Alertions began life in the early 2000s, seem to have been tampered with in 2011, final finish last week. The only 2020 track to make it onto Music for Calendars comes with a surprising production history, with its 4-to-the-floor techno beat and dark synth backing. It's the last thing one would expect to have come from the amorphous androgynous heavy leaning early noughties era, with only the flute sample seeming to be from that time. Big synth stabs reminiscent of many late 10s tracks bring the piece more up to date, with field recordings leading into an ambient closing environment full of reversed synths. This environment is missing from the version of Music for Calendars. It is, to the best of my knowledge, the first original FSOL track to have a 4-to-the-floor techno type beat since the release of Landmass in 1996. Transmitter, Obtainable. Alright peoples, here's a track from 2013-ish, a leftover from the Black Hill Transmitter sessions. Black Hill Transmitter, Obtainable. Enjoy. The first Black Hill Transmitter track in a while, as well as the first non-FSOL track on 2020's calendar release, Obtainable is a welcome change of timbre after the colder IDM sounds of much of the album. With electric guitar improv, granulated acoustic guitar chords and gentle acoustic drums, the piece is, for me, a highlight of the Black Hill Transmitter project, and a real shame not to have on their main album. The track shares many sounds with the Black Hill Transmitter's second EP piece Alignment, suggesting it may be a remix or alternate take. The future sound of London, Talus. Greetings, calendar subscribers. Every sound created using Gen X1, processed through various foot pedals and then sampled using an Akai S3200XL. Pitched, reversed and further internal FX, result FSOL Talus. Enjoy. Talus was first heard on the Stylophone Facebook page, with them reporting the new track made using their new low-budget synth, the piece appearing on YouTube. A few days later, it appeared as October 2020's calendar track. It's a remarkable track considering the only sound source is a single, fairly limited instrument, another reminder of how excellent FSOL are at creating pieces in their own sound regardless of the equipment. With its skittering beats and growling synths, it fits comfortably in with the typical sound of the late 10s and early 20s. Humanoid, Ixum. Hiya subscribers, here's the track for November. This month's track is from Humanoid, titled Ixum. It was created in February 2020. Unusually for a Humanoid track, Ixum opens with an environment featuring percussion and guitar samples. With the project largely focusing on acid and hard-hitting IDM, the mellower tones of Ixum's minimal skittering rhythms and spacious synth pads are slightly out of character. Indeed, had the track been released as FSOL, it's unlikely anybody would have blinked. It's an excellent piece though. Future Sound of London, Belly, 2020. Hey up, end of year track comes from FSOL, Belly 2020. Not sure when this was first written, but the Atari discs were found and this was created. Have a happy year transition. Much love from the FSOL crew. As I spoke about a few videos ago, I'm not a fan of Into the Belly. This remix, however, feels like a dramatic improvement with some more space in the mix, far less of an emphasis on the trebly sequence itself modulating into acidic squelches in times, more dynamics in the bass line and a great melody in the second half. Still nowhere near my favourite FSOL pieces, but I'm happy that there's a version of the track that's more to my taste. FSOLDigital presents a controlled Vista. Release date 9th of March 2020, CD. 30th of March 2020, download. 11th of December 2020, LP. Following the success of a number of excellent digital download charity compilations, Martin Bolton took a bolder step in 2019 and organised the physical equivalent, resulting in an 11 CD box set called Touched by Silence, including albums by Scanodron, Mick Chillage, Locust, Anders Illar, Joel Tamik, Autumn of Communion, Eric the Taylor, and of course FSOL. The final two discs are various artists' compilations, including the debut track by Aperture's My Musical Project with Brian, which I covered a few weeks back. The box set began life when Martin spotted one of his regular Touch Music customers was a fellow South Wales local, and the two met up. The customer Nathan ran Taikanal Workshop and suggested he could make a short run of wooden boxes to house a release. Martin began reaching out to artists to provide material to make the box set a big and notable release, one worthy deluxe packaging treatment. Ian Anderson from the Designers Republic was brought on board to design the individual disc art, with each disc showing a cross-section of a tree trunk fitting the wooden theme. Touched by Silence was made available to order on the 13th December 2019, but with the controlled Vista only available as a CD, i.e. no download, so it wasn't actually available to hear until the CDs shipped in March 2020, unlike all the other albums which were available with pre-orders to download. Generally running their own digital label, FSOL tend to keep digital releases in-house, and so the download edition appeared on FSOLDigital itself at the end of the month, and at the same time a number of other new releases were uploaded coinciding with the first COVID lockdowns. The whole of FSOLDigital offered a discount on download releases, which, combined with a large amount of new material, was one of many welcome moments in what was some of the most... well, you don't need platitudes to describe 2020. The other releases from that time will be discussed later. A 12-inch picture disc LP version of Controlled Vista was released on Touched Revolutions at the end of 2020. The label was set up as a picture disc sister to Touched Music, with an emphasis on artwork and visuals. For release TR303, an FSOL release seemed fitting, and so Controlled Vista was chosen. This inspired Martin to release Scanner's album from the box set as TR404. The vinyl release was launched with Touched Music FSOL Night 4 and helped make the album more widely available. The digital release's art was used for the LP edition, an image featuring an airport runway photograph and some out-of-focus lo-fi text of the band name, titles and, in reverse, the phrase safety film that brings to mind the 1970s oriented feel of the Electric Brainstorm series, with a photo of the Digitana SX1 on the B-side. This version features design contributions from Grid Pattern. The digital edition replaces most of the text with the 5 logos, and with the band name and title overlaying each other in the top left-hand corner in a font not seen on a release before. There's been some debate about quite what FSOLDigital presents a Controlled Vista actually is. Is it a new album? A mix? A compilation? I suppose it's something of a blend of the three. With tracks by FSOL, Yage, Humanoid and Synth-A, it's certainly not a conventional album, and presented as a single 49-minute track or two 25-minute tracks, with numerous answer phone messages appearing throughout and FSOL and FSOLDigital watermark sounds. It feels quite a lot like a radio transmission, only given a physical release instead. It's only when originally writing about the album for my blog several years ago that I spotted the several passages from it originate on the Touched Music FSOL Night 3 exclusive mix, making it seem like a development of that. Ultimately, I tend to consider the Controlled Vista releases and the successors in the Mind Map series as more mixes than albums, although with the 2025 reissue of Controlled Vista being cut into individual tracks and presented as a Future Sound of London album, rather than FSOLDigital Presents, the line is blurred further. Regardless of the format, Future Sound of London and FSOLDigital spoken watermarks feature throughout, meaning it does definitely sound like a mix. For a long while I found Controlled Vista a very difficult listen, and I've since realised that was partly because I was going in expecting a traditional album. And it's absolutely not. There's no distinct atmosphere or place conjured by the tracks, and the combination of modern pieces with 90s environments and regular answer phone messages and watermarks is a major factor. It occupies a slightly strange world, a halfway house between environmental and a 3D Headspace Tour transmission in terms of both sound and atmosphere. At times, the Environment 6 trilogy and Electric Brainstorm atmospheres of sinister British countryside comes through, but with fewer field recordings and odd atmospheric sounds, it feels a touch less fertile than a typical FSOL album. All in all, while it's definitely grown on me over the years, it still remains elusive, and I'm yet to decide whether it's something that will click into place one day, or if it's simply just an album that doesn't really work for me. The 21-track expanded edition from this year, which I'll get into down the line, makes it more approachable, so I continue to work on it. Perhaps the purely electronic sound and answer phone messages help, but I saw a lot of enthusiastic response for the release online, with many comparing it favourably with the band's 90s ISDN transmissions. The Future Sound of London, I Can't Find You. Controlled Vista opens quite jarringly with percussion and flute, feeling very much like we've just tuned in halfway through a radio show. The main theme of I Can't Find You fades in with acoustic drums and gurgling synth noises, overlaid with classic transmission-style answer phone messages over the top, including someone stating the piece's title, and the How Come You're Never Around Anymore sample from the end of the Glaxial Pharmaceutical. Moody, brooding synth pads add suspense before chopped abstract voice samples bring things to a close. The piece closes on a lengthy environment with sounds from Lifeform Ends, windscreen wipers, scraping metal, guitar chords from Unforth, while you are entering Audio Copyright Zone 3, announces the Earthbeats central computer, reminding us that this is indeed more like a mix. FSOL Daniel Pemberton offers on the table. Some Woodwind from the Glacier family of tracks opens the second piece. Offers on the table is a jazzy number with Dan Pemberton's sinister and slightly sleazy piano accompanied by brushed drums, string samples and vibraphone. The piece was first heard on the 15-minute mix created for Touched Music FSOL Night 2. Further answer phone messages appear in the second half, including one warning the band not to tell anyone about a couple of deals on the cards at the time, giving an origin for the track's title. Their sleazy jazzy vibe has subtle hints of ISDN and the Woodlands of old, but in general the cleaner production makes it a pretty new sound for FSOL. It's approaching the 5-minute mark when the piece begins to fade out into the closing environment, featuring several Future Sound of London stings, along with samples from Papua New Guinea and hidden signs closing environment, and further answer phone messages.
The future sound of London. The future sound of London. The future sound of London.
Future Sound of London, Closure. A minimal, glitchy, percussive piece with sounds from You're Creeping Me Out played over the top. These skeletal, fluttering beats are overlaid with distortion and sent through several delays, but remain the focus with only a very subtle bass line adding melodic presence to the piece. By the end, a snaky flute line does appear, adding an oddly ethnic touch to such an electronic track. Further Future Sound London and FSOLDigital stings close. Future Sound of London, You Will Forget About Us. A purely ambient piece, little more than an extended environment, opening with quiet chanting and barking dogs with an FSOLDigital ident over the top. Distorted synths, EMS squelches and spoken samples stating you'll forget about me and why would I do that place the piece in pretty dark territory in line with the development of the band's sound, although extended environment sections like this are a welcome change after some very conventionally structured tracks of late. Another environment with some EMS sounds as well as synths from Globular follows, having been also heard on the Planet Earth mix a few months earlier. Future Sound of London, Organic Weapon. Man was created as the ultimate organic weapon. A movie quote from The Guyver, heard regularly in the early 90s, announces this chunky IDM track. With dark, organish arpeggios and pounding beats, it's maybe the most reminiscent of some of the more heavy-going tracks from the Ramblings EPs. Then there's a reworked version of the Vit opening environment to take us further back into the 90s. You probably know my feeling on reuse of sounds between albums by now, but this really takes me out of the mood that the album's seemingly trying to create. Yage, Subtle Cause. The first non-FSOL track of a controlled Vista is Yage's Subtle Cause, although the name is unusual as it shares little in common with the other Yage tracks of the 21st century, with 70s sounding analogue synths, digital percussion and a warm major key feel, being reminiscent of the music of Cluster and some of their side projects. The piece was first heard on the Touched Music FSOL Night 3. VIT environments continue over the top, and Deepak Chopra samples add a touch of amorphous to proceedings.
Curving back within myself, I create again and again and again. I create my mind, I create my body, I create my perceptual experiences. In fact, for the entire universe that I experience, I am the subtle cause.
Yage, Across 82. The opening environment car sample is a further amorphous leaning moment. Across 82 is a dark ambient piece with bagpipes and scuzzy lo-fi synths, once again seemingly at odds with Yage's usual more fourth world sound. Further use of the lifeform ends washes keep the lifeform's mood present. As with the previous piece, the 1 minute runtime make it feel slightly inconsequential. Humanoid, Tiny Machine Birth. All asks questions, backed by disembodied laughter, and suddenly the atmosphere brightens a lot for this bouncy piece of glitchy IDM with playful innocent synths, a long way from any previous Humanoid track. The beats aren't far off those from Closure from earlier, and it really blurs the lines between FSOL and Humanoid more than they ever have been. Overdriven synth notes take over briefly, but the focus is mostly on the almost childlike pads. The track was later released in full, running to 6 minutes 30, more than twice the runtime of the edited version on a controlled Vista, on the Touched Music compilation of Found Sound 2. While it's a very pretty piece, I always found the 3 minutes here to be enough. Future Sound of London Optical Overspill. Chopped up spoken word, bagpipes and synth bubbles overlay the final few seconds of Tiny Machine Birth and continue throughout this track, an unusually structured piece of thick ambient textures and occasionally jazzy drum fills. With dark synth bleeps, sharp percussion and nocturnal sounding pads, the vibe is very close to that of the SX1 Live Improvisations album. Vue's style, fluttering glitches and reversed speech bring the piece to the brushed jazzy drums that come out of the blue to form its outro. The Future Sound of London, A Type of Thought. This Einstein quote accompanies strings from The Wheel of Life. A quiet environment of looped field recordings follows, and then there's a brief humanoid-style slab of noise, followed by the Earthbeat central computer. A Type of Thought closes on 30 seconds of bleeps, reversed sounds, and further answer machine messages. This is FSOL at its most abstract. As part of a mix, it works as a brief respite, but as an individual track, it's barely even there.
You are listening to a test transmission for a new form of information transfer. Not only are you receiving audio, but you are also receiving image and text data. Test transmission beginning. Start program. Please stand by for visual data 1.
Cynthia A, Rivers Over Roads. An uncharacteristically upbeat piece by Cynthia A with a bouncy major key feel. Of course, the only actual definition of a Cynthia A release is one that's made entirely using the EMS Cynthia AKS, but the string-like sounds, swampy rhythms and playful squelches here are a world away from the sound found on Ignition of the Sun, and it makes one wonder whether Optical Trees, the mooted second Cynthia A album, will be very different to the first should it ever come out. Yage, Tower City North. The final Yage track from the original release of A Controlled Vista, another ambient piece with answer phone messages over the top. This is back in darker, more sinister territory again, these subtle melodic fragments returning to minor key territory, and some of the plinky synth sounds aren't dissimilar to those found during the early 1994's 3D Headspace tour, reinforcing the record's strange link to both the past and the present. The melancholic environment of reverse guitars and field recordings continues the ambience through to the next track. I have to be honest, I can't begin to work out what makes a Yage track and what makes an FSOL track on this album. The future sound of London, Slope/5/A. Another track running to little over a minute. This one is at least more than atmospherics, with mid-tempo beats, electric bass and strangely textured synth pads. Slope/5/A is an interesting callback to 90s FSOL in sound, although the rhythmic elements feel more closely tied to this era. It doesn't really go anywhere, just cycles around a few times and departs as abruptly as it arrived. The future sound of London, Control Vista. It's not quite a title track, but it's very close. Control Vista is curiously nothing to do with the FSOLDigital track of the same name from the 2018 Calendar album. Instead, it's a breezy, atmospheric piece for airy synths, gated voice samples and an excellent drum break, falling somewhere between the Environment series ambience and Black Hill Transmitter chunky percussion. Breaking down into less rhythmic sections with reverse percussion, its toing and froing structure makes it feel much more like a fully developed classic FSOL style piece in contrast with some of the more sketch-like tracks on the album. Further classic FSOL style sounds come in the form of female vocal samples, creating an eerie and lengthy environment closing out the piece. Humanoid, Mass Made. Another Humanoid piece on the more skittery atmospheric end of things as opposed to anything approaching acid. The use of percussion sounds lends a mid-90s vibe in places, while the rest of the beat programming is dense and complex. Much like with Tiny Machine Birth, Mass Made could easily have been labelled as FSOL and nobody would have batted an eyelid. Indeed, this is true of the whole album, to be fair. The future sound of London, The Old Coastal Path. A cold electronic track from FSOL containing analogue synth pads, lo-fi drum machines and reversed sounds with a wonderfully yearning feeling throughout. The title is a perfect fit, suggesting a precarious walk along a cold, damp path looking out over a misty sea on a winter's afternoon. It's my favourite piece on A Controlled Vista and a wonderful way to end. Of course, there are now 5 further tracks on the album, but as I say, I'll get to those when I finally hit the 2025 videos in a couple of months' time. Touched Music FSOL Night 4, 13th of November 2020. To celebrate the release of the Controlled Vista picture disc on Touch Revolutions, Martin held the 4th FSOL night on his Touched Music Mixler page and was happy to present an exclusive hour-long mix by FSOL for the night. Called Mind Maps, it would later be released as a CD on Touched Music. During the show, Martin mentioned in the chat that he and the band were looking at the possibility of releasing the mix on Touched. There was initially talk of putting it out as vinyl, but for various reasons CD was decided as the most suitable format, which makes sense given that it's a single 61-minute unbroken mix. It effectively continues the Controlled Vista series, a mix of FSOL and alias tracks, remixes, exclusive environments and a lot of answer phone messages, presented in the style of the band's ISDN transmissions radio shows and podroom mixes, with various band idents and stings used as watermarks throughout. Before the mix began, listeners were treated to about 20 minutes of warped laughter sounds. What a long 20 minutes that was. And the last second of that opens the CD edition.
Okay, thank you.
That's pretty much it for the unusually short transmission intro section. It's straight into an electronic version of the Andy Cato track, given the monstrous psychedelic bubble treatment a few years before. Having always been fond of that version's electronic breakdown, this mix definitely really appeals to me. Track titles were given by Martin on the night of broadcast, and it was once again called The Coastal Path, despite it clearly being a remix of Florence to Rome. I wonder at what point the error originated. It's followed by an environment of running water, and surprise surprise, the first answer phone message of the mix, which crossfades into the Humanoid remix of B12's Orbiter 12, first released on Touch 2 the remixes in 2015. Another answer phone message acts as a brief linking section leading into the then unreleased Synthie A remix of Min-Y-Llan's Lot EM5. A sample from 2010's Insidious, I can still hear that voice, brings things back to the present, over an environment of odd drones. This leads into the second Min-Y-Llan remix of the mix, with the Yage reworking of Sunday Cycling, a gorgeous track. It closes with an answer phone message inviting Brian and Gaz to travel to the Amazon rainforest in Brazil to film and record Shaman and the whole shebang, with a BBC crew. As we've never heard anything else about this, it seems they didn't take up the offer. It did at least have some effect, giving a working title to the next piece. The FSOL track slowly slipped away, originally announced under the working title Rainforest, an ambient synth piece with flute melodies. It's only short but a real stunner. An unreleased Humanoid track, Scary Worlds, plays over the top, little more than some bizarre textured beats with a bunch of answer phone messages played again. An environment of synth bleeps and textures is next, followed by the previously released Humanoid track Tiny Machine Birth. Then it's time for another unreleased FSOL piece, the ambient guitar track titled Untitled 41. Very catchy. This does not in any way suggest there are only 40 or so unreleased pieces in the FSOL catalogue, however. No, then it was the 41st track recorded that day. The Humanoid remix of Cast and Flum's Borg Acid follows, closing with an environment of piano, voices, synth effects and a ringing telephone. The opening environment, The Lifeforms Path 4, is up next, followed by an alternate version of the Carbonax remix. Another extensive environment follows, with familiar herringull cries and more answer phone messages. One is from someone about working at the Barbican, clearly another potential project that never happened. Makes you wonder just how many opportunities they've passed up on over the years. Another alternate remix is next, an unreleased version of 2014's Blue Martin reworking. Up next is a brief environment, Was There Some of the Time, followed by another unreleased FSOL track simply listed as Untitled 42, a glitchy humanoid-esque piece. Another answer phone message. Unfinished album art is now affecting international release dates apparently. Is anyone surprised? Comes the Mesh remix, which wasn't mentioned by Martin on the initial broadcast. And then there's an environment with some easy listening jazz, applause, vibraphone notes, voices, and an answer phone message for Brian, call me when you've finished your spliff, alright? I think it might be Richard D. James. The final remix of the mix is an alternate version of the previously released Second Mouse remix, warping the track into particularly weird territory. Yage's Despite is given a subtle makeover with a few added synth sounds in the second half, and very welcome they are, and appears as the mix's final track. One more answer phone message brings the mix to a close. As with the controlled Vistas, there's very little in the way of a cohesive theme or atmosphere here, especially given the amount of beat-heavy tracks. This isn't really a Electric Brainstorms or 3D Headspace Tour type transmission, focusing much more on big storming tracks rather than creating a world through extensive environments. The selection of pieces, however, is solid, with some truly excellent pieces in there, and of course the remix theme that runs throughout most of the record does give it a certain sense of consistency. It also gives a home to a handful of remixes, meaning those of us who genuinely prefer physical releases get an opportunity to listen to them more often than we probably would otherwise. And we'll round up the video in a similarly jumbled manner with 2020 remixes and compilation tracks and reissues. No FSOL this year, but Humanoid and Yage get in on the action with one remix and one compilation track apiece, and we get a reissue of a classic 12-inch. Yage Despite, released on Australian Bushfire Compilation Part 1, and also later released on a controlled Vista 5.6 Mini Pack 2, more on that next week. A fitting home for this track, working with long-time collaborators Touched Music and Roll Funkin'. Funkin's compilation is an international collective effort to generate funds for the rescue, preservation and safe sanctuary of koalas and other vulnerable wildlife affected by the unprecedented catastrophic fires of the Australian Black Summer, September 19 to February 20, resulting in a massive loss of habitable forests. The track itself is unusual for Yage, not sounding at all like the Woodlands of old, or Pygmy, but more like a Humanoid or FSOL piece from 2020 with a four-to-the-floor kick drum and layers of disorienting synth pads. An alternate mix features on Mind Maps, and the track itself also appears on controlled Vista 5.6. Min-Y-Llan, Sunday Cycling reinterpreted by Yage. Touch Music owner Martin Bolton, aka Min-Y-Llan, brought Yage in to provide this remix for his Snagged album. The sound will be familiar to anyone who's heard FSOLDigital releases from 2016 onwards, with an overtly electronic sound with scratchy glitchy beats and more than a touch of IDM to it. However, Bolton's own melodies are quite different to those normally found in an FSOL track, less gloomy and more emotional, giving the piece its own identity. With beautiful chords and synth lines, it's a haunting and emotive piece and one of my favourite remixes of the FSOLDigital era. At 8 minutes in length, the track is also given room to breathe and uses its runtime well, creating a wonderful piece to get lost in. The album also contains a track called D_Dougans, a kind of friendly response to the FSOL track Bolton. The piece also ended up released on Mind Maps. Anodyne Beyond Chaos Humanoid Remix. Analogical Force brought 12 remixes on board to rework tracks from their back catalogue for the label's 30th release. For this, Brian took on Anodyne's Beyond Chaos, remoulding the original's chunky IDM sound as a slice of much heavier hitting acid by bringing the distorted 303 line into sharp focus and adding a pounding minimal drum beat. The mix of acid, dark atmospherics and straightforward rhythms is a combination not heard on previous Humanoid tracks, and it makes it a noteworthy remix. Humanoid Tiny Machine Birth. The gentlest, warmest sounding Humanoid track to date, Tiny Machine Birth is a fitting title for this piece of quietly skittering drum machines and mellow, uplifting synth pads. First appeared on a controlled Vista in heavily edited form, with the full-length track eventually being released on Touched Music's Found Sound 2 compilation in 2020, along with the previously released FSOL track Nightscape, and it was also included on the first Mind Mapped mix. There's an almost naive playfulness to the piece, and the welcoming atmosphere makes it an easy track to get lost in despite its minimal arrangement. Mental Cube EP. Release date 10th of February 2020. By far the most requested track for re-releasing in the band's catalogue, Q finally received a new 12-inch release in early 2020. There were a huge number of plans at the time, including a straight repress of the 1990 EP, a double A-side single, even possibly a Mental Cube album compiling all of the project's tracks. In the end, a new EP combining the two most famous pieces from the 1990 EP, the later single So This Is Love and In the Mind of a Child, originally released as Indo-Tribe but first planned to be a Mental Cube track, was decided upon. A lot of people seemed unhappy that the 4-minute edited mix of Q appears rather than the full 6.5-minute, and this does seem a little bit of an oversight given how difficult that original version is to get a hold of, but in general it's great to have the tracks back in print once more. Bucky's original EP artwork appears on a sticker on the plain sleeve, as well as on side A, with the So This Is Love art appearing on side B. The run of 5 logos appears on both sides, as well as on the sticker. The sticker also contains the text of each Sound London present Mental Cube original recordings from 1990. And on that note, we've reached the end of our first video of 2020. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the music, so drop me a comment down below, and hit the subscribe, the like, the share buttons, the usual stuff. I'll be back very soon, next week, looking at what else happened in the turbulent year of 2020, so I hope you'll join me then.